Welcome to Configure It Done, the podcast where SAP leaders share real insights, proven strategies, and stories from front lines of major SAP transformations. Get inspired, get informed, let's get it done.
Welcome back to the Configure It Done podcast. I just wrote a few notes here because 2025 has been a big year for the Configure It Done podcast, and we've had some brilliant guests. Allan, you're actually the 14th episode that we've done this year. And it started last January, and we had Mark Ruderman from EY, and he was looking at our S4 Do's and Don'ts series as an architect's point of view. And then we've had a couple more topics as well. We had Bruce McKinnon come in and speak around business cases and how to get them approved. We've had a bit of an AI lens with Deborah Linda and Jason Anthony. You might know some of these names, but they focused on AI. And then more recently, we've had a bit of SDT, and we had Justin Bullitt from CBS and Frank Magalozzi from KPMG. But we were recommended to speak to you from one of your colleagues, Wes Duff, things in your team, and he called you the Godfather of Bluefield.
Hey, mafioso. What can I say? Yeah.
So, Allan Coulter, thanks for coming on.
No worries.
The podcast. I'd love to get a bit of an understanding of what you're doing in Australia, first and foremost. A little bit about your career. I understand you're the ANZ SAP Leader at IBM at the minute. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. Good.
Very good. Obviously, you've left the best to last, right? This is the last one of the series for this year, so glad to fill the prime spot. So I'm in Australia. I've been here for roughly 2 years in February, actually. Yeah, so not long. I was the global CTO in IBM for about 7 odd years, actually. So this is a bit of a change, actually, to that, right? So, look, I mean, I think IBM's known globally, right, for sure. I think our brand name sort of was always linked to the defense engagement for many years, but we didn't really do an awful lot of work outside defense. In fact, when I first met SAP, when I came down here, they said, do you guys still do SAP? which I thought was mental, right? And so a lot of it's been really just re-socializing the IBM brand with the market here, right? And this year's been super successful, actually. So I think we've really pivoted, actually. And I think what we'll talk about today, right, really our leadership in that Bluefield space has really kind of led to that sort of like reinvigoration of what we do. So I've been with IBM 27 years. Started off in the UK, as you can tell by my amazing accent, and so lived or worked in London for best part of 15 years. Spent many years in the Nordics as well. So my job in IBM after was going in sort of like addressing accounts where I had maybe just sort of needed a bit of a reset, right? Hence then I went to the global CTO role, and then back here in Australia.
27 years. What keeps you there?
The money. No, I'm joking. I grew up, kind of like Mark. Like I was an architect by my profession, and actually, I actually joined PW before they became PwC. Then we got bought by IBM 2002. Right. But for me, it was great, right? Because I always had that kind of architect background, and so then joining a company which is like renowned for technology, right? Well, for me, it was fantastic, right? And with IBM, you can, I think you can almost like make your own job up as well sometimes, right? Where, so obviously you can work with research, you can work with the outsourcing business, right? So you work with software, right? There's a high degree of collaboration across the business. So I always found it a really interesting place to work, right? And obviously the fact that I could travel and work with really quite a lot of diverse customers, all just made it interesting, actually. So I never really felt any real compulsion to leave. And then it's amazing, 27 years later, I'm still here, right? Just feels like yesterday, actually, since I joined.
And after 27 years, obviously coming to the small island of Australia, and it's always good to have someone come in with a global lens. And like you said, you've been here nearly 2 years now, but what's your What's your view of Australia so far, in particular in the SAP space, and in their view,
So, look, it's been interesting for sure, right? I think one of the first things I did when I came down here, I interviewed a lot of CIOs, right? IBM customers are not IBM customers. Because obviously when we came down here, the market penetration for S4 was about 17%, really low compared to the other markets. So I was really intrigued about why, right? What was that sort of reticence to actually go through the S4 journey? And the theme we got back was fairly consistent, right? Which that most of the CXOs have said, look, we've done this before in the past, right? And obviously took too long, cost too much, never really got the benefits that were really promised. So there was a lot of really a sentiment about really what's the compelling reason for doing this.
Yeah,
we get the compliance story, but really we're not really bought into it, right? And therefore we need another. We really need another story to make us really believe that this is worthwhile doing. Yeah. So I think that sort of like that first few weeks and months of really going and understanding the market and understanding the sentiment of the influencers and buyers.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the things that we talk about globally around value driven, right? It's all important. I mean, don't get me wrong. But I think for Australia in particular, it was more about risk mitigation, right? So how do you make sure the fact that what you promise, you deliver, right?
Yeah.
So making sure you've got a great team, making sure you've got a robust plan, making sure you really look at take the user along the journey. We'll maybe talk about that maybe a bit later, but really looking at the program through the lens of risk mitigation rather than just simply the promise of saving tens of billions, right? And I think that's, as I said before, this year that's really resonated well. If you look at some of the successes, it's all been really with that IBM is a trusted partner. And we always talk about that as well, right? I mean, I remember when we were doing the Gartner round a few years ago, one of the actual analysts said, look, IBM, you finish more projects than you start.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, well, what do you mean by that? So, and it went, well, you're really bad at selling and you're really bad at presentations. Yeah. It says, but at the end of the day, right, when it gets sticky, right, actually you are a trusted brand, right? Mm-hmm. People, they look at you as like an engineering organization, right? You know what you do. You've got a high certification, so you're high permission to do the work.
Yeah.
And therefore, you typically get people out of like sticky projects, And so I can name a few, obviously, but But yeah, that was our brand reputation globally, right? And then obviously that then resonates well with the local market here in Australia. So so that's how we've really been successful.
Yeah, we've noticed that locally as well. There's been a few projects that have gone off track, and you don't know the company that goes in and fixes it, and then at the end you find out, it was IBM.
Yeah. No, we're very proud of what we do, right? And we'd like obviously to be there from the start. Don't get me wrong, right? But look, first and foremost, it's about getting obviously SAP with a better sort of like recognition as well, right? Because SAP is a group piece of software, right? But there's a lot of like rogue selling and rogue buying out there.
Yep.
So we just want to make sure the fact that these things are done right, and it just helps everybody, I think, as well, right? If people see that programs can be successful, it helps everybody, not just simply ourselves.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. And you just touched on it there, Alan, around the risk adverse, how risk adverse Australia is compared to Europe, and it's an observation that you mentioned when we met last time.
Yeah.
So, like, compared to Europe, how would you describe that kind of risk adverse nature in Australia when it comes to SAP programs?
So again, I think a lot of it comes down to. So if you look at things like Europe and America, there's a lot more trust in offshoring. Where here you want to basically see there's like if I'm paying for you, I want to see and touch you, right?
Yeah. We like our own down here, for
sure, right? And also with India as well, it's like 5 hours behind as well, right? So obviously there's a different type of model, right, for Australia, because by the time you finish your morning, these guys are waking up, right? So it's a different engagement, right? But definitely there's far more sentiment about actually seeing people and actually getting more people in line of sight and really working together closely. And I think one of the biggest things that we've talked about is also about like the adoption risk, right? I mean, coming back to some of the failed projects, we've seen too many projects really being focused on a system-based implementation, right? Like let's do clean core. Like, well, it's interesting. Don't get me wrong, right? But it's like technical compliance, you know what I mean? And it kind of helps the CIO around making sure you've got kind of sustainability and maintainability downstream. But look, at the end of the day, right? Like, this is business software, and we do it to actually drive new ways of working for business consumers. So if you're not really bringing the business along, if you're not really taking this adoption mindset, right, and taking, like, looking at a more persona view and driving more of a top down design, right, then I think you're going to miss the point. Yeah, and we went to a few engagements after the event that were being done by other SIs. We spoke to finance, we spoke to procurement. They said, look, we've got more people working on this project now than we had before we even put S4 in, right? I remember there was one guy who was, I think he was the head of the asset management team. He just said, it takes me 17 Fiori screens to do now what I did on one screen before. Right, that's not progress, right? Okay, it's clean core, but it's not progress, right? So I think in these areas, you've got to look at, you've got to place your bets, right? And sometimes it really makes sense to take a more human-centric, customized view, right, to actually make sure you get people really engaging in the new ways of working, for sure, right? And I think, and so that's how we see kind of risk being played, right? So risk is, there's definitely the kind of the human aspect of being the kind of touchy-feely, making sure you're getting good quality individuals that you're working alongside with that can advise. Maybe touch on that a bit later. But secondly, the other bit is actually you've got to really look at who's actually ultimately, at the end of the day, the consumer, right? And then design the system around the consumer. Don't design a system around like the IMG or Fiori screens. I mean, that's never really going to be a foundation for success, to be honest.
I thought I'd never heard a Scotsman say touchy-feely.
Trust me, it took a long time. Right? As an architect to convince me that service design was a good thing, took a long time, right? Because, but it's right. I mean, you just learn, right, that if you go live and you really, I'm a big believer now, the fact that, look, there's about, in our view, there's maybe about 7 personas in any business that will either make or break any project, right? If you don't bring those personas along the journey, they're going to be either your best advocate or your worst enemy, right? Okay, so I always think projects are great, right, when you actually bring people along with you, right? If you get resistance, it becomes a real drudge, right? Okay, and but it took me a long time to embrace it. Maybe even about say 6-7 years ago, working with a guy, Bob Booth, back in the UK, we kind of created this kind of human-centric more method. And since then, Kinetic was the first company we really did it in the UK, security company. And from then, it's just been a foundational part of our method going forward.
Perfect. Well, we're going to touch on that in a bit about the key people on the program. But the Godfather of Bluefield, you fundamentally believe in this approach.
Oh, for sure.
For customers. So tell us a little bit about that approach and why that approach.
Look, I mean, look, so there's a company that we work with, SNP. I mean, we work with CBS and Nutuvit and others as well, but I mean, 90% plus of our business is really with SNP in this space, right? And I've worked with them since way back 2010, right? And BP actually was the first one I worked with them on when we were going from like 9 to 8 production systems down to 27. I mean, BP were crazy in those days. Just if they could afford it, they would build a new system, right? It was great for me because obviously we had so much business, right? But look, so about maybe say 7-8 years ago, we really did a sort of a strategic change. And we said, like, we know there's like Brownfield, we know there's Greenfield. These are the kind of the polar extremes. But we saw the value of the gravitational to the middle, right? And what we, Bluefield is the term that SNP call it. We have a rapid move as our method name. But look, Brownfield is, I mean, people do it, but I told one customer, just said, like, if I'm like in like North Korea, right? And all I know is like a CRT screen, right? Just because you cut a hole in a wall and put a CRT screen in there, it doesn't make it a flat screen TV, right? That's brownfield, right? Honestly, right? And I think a lot of it's done for convenience. Maybe it's the start of the journey, so they do it first up. Greenfield, like we obviously that was the kind of the default for many years. It's been dying a slow death for many years, right? For a number of reasons. One is obviously the time factor, the cost factor, but also the fact that you look at the business disruption, right? Business. At the end of the day, people have got a day job as well, right? And when you're doing a greenfield, right, there's far more design, there's far more effort, there's far more way too many workshops, right? So you're taking too many people out of the business for too long, right? As well. So we look at the kind of Bluefield as a kind of like the Goldilocks model, right? It's the way that we see is like the right sizing of your engagement, right? There's things that you do today that are really fit for purpose. Why change them, right? Okay. And then there's things that you do that you maybe want to change, right? So obviously Bluefield is a bit of a spectrum, right? There's a browny blue and a greeny blue, right? There's a bit of a shade, right? And we just do that Goldilocks effect, right? We just simply right size it. What makes sense for you, right? And it'll be on that particular spectrum. So look, for us, it's I would say probably in IBM today, maybe 70% of the work we do globally is on this kind of Bluefield approach, and it just keeps going up and up and up every single year. I think it's one of the things that we've positioned really well in the market here. We've done a lot of work with some advisors like Libertas and Invictus and ISG. We've explained what this really is. So they can also then actually kind of pass that on to when they're doing their own advisory work, right? So for us, it's what we specialize in for sure. One of the first things I did when I came here, I actually built my own practice really around this as well. So we hired, I kind of hired as like the inverse pyramid, right? Everybody kind of like tries to create hires to go at the bottom. I meant scrap that. I don't think that's what Australia was looking for. I think they were looking for more high-end value, higher band consultants. So my hiring has actually been at the upper end, not the lower end, right? And so the first things I did here was I brought in guys from Germany, from America, the guys I knew from the global arena. I brought them down to Australia, right, to basically then specialize in this Bluefield and finance modernization space. And it's really helped us in the last couple of years for sure.
That's good. Do you think there's a place for brown and green as well as Bluefield in the market? Or
look, brown, as I said before, I think brown. I think if you're starting the journey and just want to get started, just to kind of get the compliance block text, right, then do it, right. But I think once you truly appreciate what actually is the difference between S4 and ECC, right, then and the things that you can and should do. There's a lot of rubbish that people have built over years, right? That a lot of good as well. Don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of rubbish that people have built, right? And you don't want to take that rubbish into a new system, right? For sure. So I think ticking the compliance box just is like wave one of a multi wave journey. Sure, do brownfield, right? But then you need to kind of follow up with other activities as sort of some degree of continuous kind of modernization. We just believe that Bluefield you can do, instead of taking a two-step approach, you can do it in one step. Right? That's why we still push the kind of the Bluefield angle for sure. Greenfield is a reason for Greenfield. I mean, honestly, in my view, unless you're coming from an Oracle or a non-SAP baseline, then for sure Greenfield. But honestly, I think that today most organizations, I think, are better served with taking a far more pragmatic view. The old days, the view is like, oh, we've got so much custom code, we've got really bad data. I mean, yeah, but I can fix that, right? I mean, you don't need to take a philosophy of starting again just because you've got bad code and bad data. We can fix that through other, the partnerships we have with SmartShift, for example, the partnerships we have with SNP around the data challenge and the code challenge. The stuff that we do on the process side with, the Signavios, the UiPaths and other things, there's ways in which we can actually fix things without kind of like throwing away all that investment. There's one other reason why we think blue is greater than green. I think if you think of it from a kind of financial, term as well.
Yep.
If you have an asset, if you modernise the asset, it can stay in a balance sheet. If you have an asset that you're writing off because you're going greenfield, again, you've got to write it off as well, right? So there is also a balance sheet implication by going green over blue, for example, as well. And that also helps in the business case when you start looking at the P&L and the balance sheet implications of taking these approaches as well.
Yeah. That's where we've had a lot of, that risk averse, and it's all about the balance sheet.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So CFOs would love to hear that.
For sure. You touched, Alan, on the different partnerships you have with the likes of S&P, Libertas.
Yeah.
How important are those partnerships to consultancies like IBM when delivering these type of programs?
100%. So look, again, it is an intentional strategy that we have, right? So in the same way that customers maybe go with maybe sometimes a best of breed philosophy to the actual systems, we take a best of breed view on how we deliver engagements. Look, I know what I'm good at. But I know there's a lot of people out there who are better at certain things than I am, right? So for example, the SmartShift guys are amazing at code remediation, right? The tools they have, the automations they have. Companies like Wessenacker on supply chain, companies like, even like enterprise-wide who are do amazing stuff in retail. Look, there is an ecosystem that we have built, right? And I used to be the exec for SmartShift and SNP and Cinity and UiPath and all these other, in the old role, right? And it's just a natural synergy.
Yeah.
So sometimes I talk about IBM being the system orchestrator, not the system integrator.
Yeah.
Because what we're doing is we're bringing in we're bringing the ecosystem behind us. Right. And it really, I think it is something that truly differentiates us from an Accenture, right? Because they'll say we can do everything, right? And maybe they can. I'm not saying they're lying or anything, right? But I just think the fact that recognizing the strengths of others, I think, is also a value for anybody, actually, right? So and then when you bring that sort of that unified power into an engagement, we really get the best of the market, the best of the best, in effect. And again, it just comes down to that risk mitigation. I really think the fact that if people can see you collaborating with, so IBM's going in with an AWS or a Microsoft or an SNP or a SmartShift or even with SAP sometimes, right? Not very often, but sometimes, right? Sometimes it gives customers a bit more of a comfort, the fact that actually that I know I'm going to get really good people working on this program, but I've also got a single point of accountability, right? So it's not going to be chaotic. It's actually a managed, orchestrated implementation outcome, for example, as well. So for me and for IBM in general, it's a super important strategy to have these ecosystems in place.
Yeah, definitely. It's what we touched on there, like just before that, there is enough work to go around for everyone and kind of
for sure.
Collaborative
approach. Yeah. Look, I mean, and even I remember Chris Ray, he obviously from Delray, he said that as well a couple of years ago. He just said if you take all the capacity in Australia, you're only going to get in the next couple of years to only about maybe say 60% completion by 2027. Right. So look, there's a couple of things I think are really important, right? And obviously there's enough work for everybody for sure, right? Yeah. But that doesn't mean to say the fact that the quality of the work should drop, right? I think there's my own reflections of Australia. There's a lot of rogue selling, and rogue buying, right? I remember speaking to Doug Gibson from Invictus on this last week, right? Look, when we bid for work, right? There's money and time and effort that goes into it. So what we don't, so when what you ask for is not what you buy ultimately at the end of the day, right? We think that's quite poor behaviour, right? And we've seen that in a couple of engagements, and we've seen also SIs, also like dropping the price to ridiculous levels, right? I'm a big believer, like, when I was starting off my career, one of the engineers I worked for, he just said, you get a good day's labour for a good day's work, right? Good day's pay for a good day's labour. Yeah. And I believe in that. It's held me all my way through life, right? Which is to go into these projects, right? It's a partnership, it's a collaboration, right? So partnership doesn't mean to say that one person's abusing the other, right? So I think you're looking for a fair price for a fair day's labour as well. Yeah. So when you see companies dropping their pants a bit, right, and going off and like taking Like, I won't name them, right? But there was one gig where they took out 5 million of the price on the last day of bidding.
Yeah.
They go, come on, guys, right? This is
Wow. Yeah.
So this is stupid, right? It gives everybody a bad name, right? And so I mean, I discussed this with Frank Van Nierkerk actually just last week. Actually, like, you still need to be ethical in what you do as well, right? Because I think it'll catch up on you as well, right? To be 100%. Honest. Yeah. So
especially in this small ecosystem.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
I just wanted to take that back. I really wanted to hone in on the IBM way and bringing the best of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
I think it's only Accenture and Capgemini that claim they could do everything. But just before this podcast as well, we were talking about the Lions Tour when you get the best of the best from other countries. Yeah. But when you look at IBM's way, when you bring in the best of the ecosystem, how do you create that kind of one team and that one direction to go in? I think that's quite an interesting point. Yeah.
Look, I think with certain partners it's easier, right? Obviously, because you've got a long history with them, globally and locally.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you look at defense, for example, as well, right? Defense actually is, almost like a Lions team, right? I mean, IBM is actually contractually obliged to bring in other partners as part of the actual defense ecosystem as well, right? So there's been a natural drumbeat from big accounts like defense, right? We are working with likes of Del Rey and Chrome Consulting and others as well over time. So people, I mean, I've known Mark from Chrome for years, way back to days in the UK. So I think, it's easy with a lot of companies. Western Acker, I think, is easy because obviously we've had a really strong global relationship as well, right? And we just simply applied it locally as well. But obviously there's a few local providers, I think, where we're meeting together for the first time.
Yeah.
And if I think for them is it's just working with us and just getting that experience of that we know how to plug you in to these particular models, right? I generally find that with the local partners that there's a general sort of like hesitance at first, right? Because they think they're going to get kind of like screwed over, right? They've been working with others in the past, right? They've mentioned them to me. I won't mention them on the podcast, right? And so they were always quite fearful of the big players like Accenture's, Deloitte's, the IBMs, etc. Because they think they're just going to be used for IP, then just dumped.
Yeah.
Right. But just say that's not what we do. Right. When we work with you, we truly work with you, and then we try and make it fair for you as well. Right. And so as long as people understand the fact that that we are the orchestrator, the choreographer, end of the day, it's on the liability is on me. Right. Okay. So it's on us to make sure the fact that we do that real sort of integration. So we do have the method now about how we bring everybody into the common method, the common ways of working. So we do that very early on in the engagement cycle.
Yeah.
If you haven't worked with you before. But as I say, with SNP in particular, it's just a drumbeat now. Yeah. So even like Phil and Richard and the team here locally, right, we've just got a real way of working, right? That serve the testimony of time, right? So if you look at like Ventia, Mitsubishi, Asahi, there's just a normal way of working now that we've established.
It just sounds like relationship and trust, like it's built up.
Yeah, for sure, right? So look, I won't mention Phil's taste of music, right, or how good he's making pizza, right? Yeah, so he's coming over. He's the pizza maker for the New Year party at my house, right? And so, we know them as a company, we know them as people, right? So we know them inside out, right?
Yeah.
And it really, it's almost like something that's hard to like draw the boundary line between who's IBM and who's SNP.
Yeah.
So when we do work together, but if whether they're priming it or I'm priming it, we typically will work together, for example, as well, right? And I think when clients see that natural level of collaboration, I think it just makes it, you'll get a good outcome, right? As well. So.
It's refreshing to hear. That trust, especially in this market.
Yeah.
I think that's a good segue to focus on people and people on programs.
Sure.
And when we met before, you mentioned around the CFO not necessarily being the most important person on the program. What stakeholders are?
Look, don't get me wrong, right? So we definitely see finance being super important in any modernization, right? As a sponsor, as well as obviously, the real sort of like driver behind some things that are going on. But again, I think that, if you look at, Australia, obviously, if you look at the companies, right, they're obviously, there's a heavy asset intensive, set of organizations here, right? If you look at the utility sector, if you look at the energy sector, if you look at the kind of the sector which actually supports that sector as well, right? Like the Ventias, the Downers, and things of that. There's a huge ecosystem that runs around this asset intensiveness nature of Australia, basically, as well, right?
Yeah.
So I think, getting on board, getting the guys who are the head of asset engineering, the people who are looking at head of services, right? I think these are super important as well, right? So you can't just focus on, you can't be myopic and say that because you've got the money, you're important. I mean, of course you're important, right? But it comes back to the adoption at the end of the day, as I said before, that you've got to anchor this with the people who are actually the most material in making the actual business case work, right? And actually, obviously, there's finance will be modernized and finance will be important, right? And finance will move them from bean counting to decision making for sure. But at the end of the business case really is predicated on really more around asset optimization, asset performance, field service management execution. That's where we see the majority of business cases actually being realized. And obviously, from the CIO, obviously then getting really that sort of like rationalized view from taking a very complex heterogeneous landscape and moving it towards more of an SV backbone, I think, as well, right? So for me, there's obviously there's a blend of execs, right, which are super important, which is why when we do our advisory work, we've got a thing called rapid discovery, where we go in and do advisory work. The first thing we do is executive alignment, right? Because it may sound the fact everybody's on the same page, right? But when you really get into it and you say, what's your motivation? What's important for you? And then you do that as a one-to-one, then you play it back in the room, right? You'll see just competing priorities, right? So just said, unless we're on the same page about what is the ambition, the intention, it's really hard to get to a successful outcome, right? So given the fact that I always say the fact that you cannot abdicate your own transformation modernization, so it's got to come from you. It doesn't come from me. I can tell you things that you can and should do, but you're the guys who need to buy into it, right? So unless you're bought into this in total, right, then what you can't have during the course of the program is, well, I told you should have done this, or I told you should have done this, right? So you've got to get that alignment as well, right? That's why we say the fact getting that before we even start doing anything. I've seen so many programs go wrong because you don't get that buy-in early, right? And then you just start building. But then people then you go, look, why am I doing this? Right? Then people who are the guy who's the head of services, or the guy who's the head of the asset management, the guy who's the head of digital supply chain go, well, nothing to do with me. Right? So you need to kind of get that real consensus up front, really, as well, and get everybody on the same page, right? And you can't force that, right? It's got to come naturally. And there's going to be a bit of a trade-off, right, as well, right? And as long as people understand that most programs now are not big bang events, right? Most programs now are iterations of value, and they're, as long as they can see themselves in the roadmap, right, and what they're getting, when they're getting it, and then we can tweak things around, etc. But you need to get that buy-in, that locking behavior. That's why I say it's not only on the CFO, right? They can be the sponsor, but sponsorship will only be successful if you get consensus across the board as well.
We're seeing this trend in the market of a lot of business people running programs now, running IT programs.
For sure.
I think that buys into what you're saying.
I mean, it all comes down to the adoption risk, right? There's no point having a successful IT program if you end up with actually 30% more headcount at the back end of it. I mean, it's pointless, right? I mean, you've completely missed the point of what you're meant to be doing, right? So, and sometimes I feel when SAP are on the bandwagon about clean core. I mean, like we talked about clean core with SAP years ago, right? This is not something that is anything new, right? And but it becomes almost like a mantra, right? Versus actually a good engineering practice. And that's all it is. It's just a good engineering discipline. But at the end of the day, right? I mean, when you go back to what SAP was, it was always business application software, right? It wasn't essentially IT software. It was meant to be business applications. So therefore, for us, it's super important to have it as a business-led engagement for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And coming back, I guess, to the Bluefield approach that you guys are working on. So could you share, I guess, some standout wins, like around, cost, time, risk adoption? Like, what are some of the standout things that?
Wow. Standout cost, right? But look, I'll go through some. Yeah, like I'll give you some really good engagements, right? So, in fact, even our own, right? If you look at IBM, actually, right? IBM, we worked with SNP and SmartShift to take our old ECC system and then move that onto S4 on the back of a Bluefield activity, right? And that was really the sort of the so we talk a lot in the market about IBM is like client zero, our client zero story. But how we save $5 billion in the back, how we save $5 billion in finance, procurement, HR. But unless you had that backbone, unless you had the kind of the S4 underpinning all of those enabling processes, we would never have been able to achieve the $5 billion, right?
So you're really practicing what you're preaching. Yeah.
So when we talk about client zero, we always like talk about how we what we could achieve, what we achieved, but off the back of a really successful, we're probably at the time one of the biggest S4 engagements, in the market actually, right? And so a really successful Bluefield event. So like the same, like Adobe, like Adobe was one, Silent Group was one. Adobe is a great example, right? Of again, they tried to do this with another SI with DMLT, just became too complex. So we went with SNP and just said, like, we'll take this over. We can fix this for you. And and we have Adobe talking about this on stage all the time now, right? About how we've helped them achieve their goals. Look, locally, if you look at things like Ventia was a great win for us this year, right? Taking a Bluefield approach as well. They looked at their processes and then said, look, they want to modernize. There's things they want to keep for sure, but there's obviously areas whereby they want to modernize, especially in finance in particular, right? That was really their one of the drivers. A lot of their field services is moving from like a more of a non-SAP backbone to also SAP as well, right? And getting more SAP is that sort of like simplified transactional system. Look, but I'll give you metrics. I won't give you like precise numbers, right? Yeah. Okay, but if you look at the averages, right? Maybe say like an average of a brownfield maybe takes between like 6-8 months or so, right? The average for a greenfield maybe say takes 2-3 years. The average for a bluefield maybe is in that sort of is the 18-20 month umbrella, right? That's the averages, right? Obviously, there's a spectrum, so obviously the range obviously could be there's a brownie blue and a greeny blue, so that's the kind of the what we see is the kind of the weighted average of bluefields, right? And so we think there's definitely a cost advantage of doing it versus a greenfield. Yeah. Because obviously with brownfield, you'll never stick at a brownfield. Yeah. Is brownfield then something else as well? So when you look at the total cost, I'll come back to that in a second, right? So when you look at the time factor, the time factor has a natural correlation to business risk as well, right? The longer you've got people out the business, the more it is, the more risk you apply in the business as well, right? Because people are not just waiting around for a big project, right? They're doing work as well, right? So when you're compromising the end use work because you've got people devoted to projects, you're by nature you're adding more risk to the enduring work, right? As well. On the cost side, I think one of the important things I really talk about is essentially, especially in the brownfield, it's not the total cost of acquisition, it's the total cost of ownership, right? Yeah. So just because your initial buy price is less than blue doesn't mean to say that ultimately the total cost of ownership will ultimately be less than blue. So it will obviously, when you add the price of stage 1 and stage 2, the price will be higher, right? Okay, so look, there's reasons why people do brown, but for us, doing it in a one-step event versus a two-step event will always give you like a lower price point when you add the two things together, right? So cost-wise, benefits-wise, business disruption-wise, we always think the fact that there's real reasons for doing this. Look, as I say, look, we always like banging about IBM and our value, but look, every client, whether it's Diageo or whether it's KSB, whether it's actually the guys here that working with locally, you get far more bang for your buck on this kind of like blue approach than you do with a brown or a green.
Yeah, it just comes back then, just bringing the customer on the journey.
For sure,
as well.
Yeah. It was a maturity thing as well, right? I mean, look, we're still doing it as well, right? When we look at, there's a lot of when we see people coming up with RFIs, right? They go brown and green. We go, yeah. So we go, look, we'll respond.
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell you what you really want as well, or what we think you really need to consider, right? I mean, I can't be as arrogant to say that I know what you want, right? But I can say, look, there are other ways that you've not considered that we believe are material that you should consider, for example, as well, right? So we always play that back, because so whether it's in an advisory phase or and that's why we spent a lot of time with like Jeff from Libertas and Doug and Invictus and the guys in ISG and others. We spent time to tell them what actually is like this Bluefield rapid move activity, because we believe in it so much as a company that we really felt the fact that when they're in their advising organizations on their migration and their timeline and their business case, it was important for them to be also brand advocates for this as well, right? And well, if you look at Ventia came through, that was Libertas engagement, for example, right? And we're going through with others with them just now as well, right? So it's been a really great story how we collaborate also with the advisors. Yeah. Because one thing that was really odd here, coming back to IBM's brand, IBM really didn't have that brand permission to be the advisor. Yeah. Because we were just seen as being an SI for defense. Yeah. So we had to basically really work with like the Jeffs and the Dougs and the others, right? To really get then our opinion actually into the kind of the advisor work that was going on as well, right? Yeah. So look, and I think it's been successful.
Yeah, sure.
Allan, it's good to see someone that's so passionate.
Yeah,
the ecosystem.
Scottish.
yeah. So passionate about your product and IBM as well. If you had one parting message to deliver to the SAP ecosystem, what would that be?
Just be better, right? I think that I mentioned this actually on a SOG event a couple of years ago, right? Which actually is because we know that there is more demand than supply, right? Sometimes it becomes, you become almost like a bit lazy, right? And it's because you're going to get work, right? And I said, and for me, laziness it's like the worst thing you could ever be, right? Yeah, because laziness means there's a bit of an arrogance, right? And you're not bringing you're not bringing your best self to the story and to the engagement, right? And look, this has been my life for 30 years, as a end user, then I became in consulting, right? So doing this SAP work has actually, paid for my mortgage and everything else for the last 30 years. Has been really how I've really grown up, really. So I'm really passionate about the fact that, on what we do, right? But I've seen too many lazy selling, lazy engagements, right? And I just really, my ask to everybody who's listening to this podcast and look, working for a customer is a privilege. I always view it as a privilege, right? Every single day you can work with a customer and actually help them achieve a better outcome is an amazing thing that we should do. Yeah. So we shouldn't take it for granted, right? We shouldn't rip them off, right? We shouldn't just sell them like under underskilled resources, right? Because it helps our margin, right? I think every day we should go there. We should always strive to be better, right? My team will tell you that as well. They've had enough hits over the head this year, right? Some of the quality of the RFIs or RFP response they've seen before they go out the door, right? I just say that's not good enough, so we have to rewrite it, right? So every day I always want people to be better. I think that's the last thing I can say.
Brilliant. Alan, thank you so much. That's really refreshing to hear.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge and insights on the market.
Yep.
And we wish IBM all the best.
Thank you very much.
26.
Same for yourself.
Cheers, Alan.
All right.
Thanks.
Okay. Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Brilliant.